I didn't choose my life. That's the confession I avoided for years. I didn't choose it with intention, courage, or desire. I simply agreed to it, one quiet moment at a time, until agreement hardened into permanence. Looking back, it feels less like a path I walked and more like a current I stopped resisting. People often ask when things went wrong. They expect a single turning point. A mistake. A tragedy. Something obvious. But nothing went wrong. That's what makes this so difficult to explain. My life unfolded exactly as it was supposed to. Smoothly. Predictably. Respectably. I did what made sense. I followed the steps that were laid out in front of me. When I hesitated, someone reminded me what was reasonable. When I doubted, I was told to be grateful. So I complied. I learned early that life rewards those who don't ask too many questions. I watched people who challenged the script struggle, stumble, fail publicly. I told myself I was being smart by choosing stability. Mature. Responsible. No one warned me that responsibility without desire slowly becomes a prison. At first, I felt proud of my self-control. Of my ability to delay gratification. To sacrifice now for a future that always seemed just a few years away. I believed fulfillment was something you earned by enduring enough discomfort. Years passed. The future kept moving. And I kept waiting. Somewhere along the way, I stopped imagining alternatives. Not because they disappeared, but because imagining them hurt too much. It was easier to tell myself that this was it. That longing was childish. That dissatisfaction was a flaw to be corrected. I became very good at explaining my life to myself. I have nothing to complain about. Others have it worse. This is what adulthood feels like. Those phrases became a shield. They protected me from asking the only question that mattered: is this life actually mine? The first cracks appeared in moments that should have felt significant. Achievements that left me strangely empty. Milestones that arrived without emotion. Applause that sounded distant, like it was meant for someone else. I remember one particular evening. I was alone, doing something completely ordinary, nothing dramatic, nothing symbolic. And suddenly, without warning, I felt a wave of grief so intense it stole my breath. Not grief for a loss. Grief for a life unlived. It felt like standing at a train station, watching a train depart, realizing too late it was the one you were supposed to be on. I couldn't even name what I had missed. I only knew it was gone. That feeling scared me. So I did what I always did when something felt dangerous. I ignored it. I stayed busy. I stayed useful. I stayed needed. I filled my calendar so thoroughly that there was no room left for reflection. Silence became the enemy. Stillness became unbearable. Because stillness made the truth louder. The truth was this: I wasn't unhappy in a dramatic way. I wasn't broken. I wasn't miserable. I was absent. I went through days on autopilot, responding instead of choosing. I said yes because it was easier than explaining no. I stayed because leaving required a reason I couldn't articulate without sounding ungrateful or selfish. From the outside, my life looked intact. From the inside, it felt borrowed. I realized that most of my decisions had been made by eliminating risk, not by pursuing meaning. I hadn't asked myself what I wanted. I had asked what would cause the least disruption. And disruption terrified me. Disruption meant disappointing people. It meant uncertainty. It meant stepping into a version of myself that had no guarantees. So I chose predictability and called it wisdom. But predictability has a cost. It trades possibility for safety. Depth for comfort. Truth for approval. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I stopped feeling like the main character in my own life. I became an observer. A caretaker of routines. A manager of expectations. Time accelerated. Years collapsed into each other. I began measuring my life not by experiences, but by endurance. By how long I could keep going without breaking. And then one day, I noticed something that changed everything. I wasn't afraid of failure anymore. I was afraid of time. Afraid that one day I would wake up and realize that my entire life had happened without my participation. That I had survived it, but never inhabited it. That fear didn't scream. It whispered. And once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. Once that fear settled in, it didn't rush me. It waited. That's how fear of time works. It doesn't panic. It observes. It shows you small, undeniable proofs that something is wrong and lets you draw your own conclusions. I started noticing how often I said, later. Later I'll rest. Later I'll change things. Later I'll take a risk. Later I'll live differently. Later became my most trusted companion. The strange thing was that nothing in my life demanded urgency. There was no crisis pushing me forward, no collapse forcing my hand. Everything functioned well enough. And that was precisely the problem. Comfort became a sedative. I told myself I was being patient, but patience without direction is just delay disguised as virtue. I told myself I was being responsible, but responsibility without honesty is just fear wearing a respectable mask. There were nights when I felt an unexplainable pressure in my chest, like something inside me was pressing against invisible walls. I couldn't explain it to anyone. There was no language for it that didn't sound melodramatic. How do you tell someone you're suffocating in a life that looks fine? So I stayed quiet. I watched myself slowly shrink in conversations. I stopped bringing up ideas that felt too personal. I learned to edit my reactions, to tone down enthusiasm, to avoid questions that might lead somewhere uncomfortable. Not because anyone asked me to. Because I had learned that authenticity complicates things. And I didn't want complications. I wanted peace. But peace without truth isn't peace. It's numbness. The breakdown didn't arrive as a breakdown. It arrived as a realization so calm it was terrifying. One day, I imagined my future in detail. Not in dreams or fantasies, but realistically. Same routines. Same compromises. Same carefully managed dissatisfaction. The image was clear. Predictable. And I felt nothing. No fear. No excitement. No resistance. Just acceptance. That was the moment I understood how deep the problem had gone. I had become comfortable with the idea of my own disappearance, not physically, but internally. I could see myself fading out of my own life and it no longer shocked me. That should have been the moment I changed everything. Instead, I froze. Because change wasn't just risky, it was morally complicated. My life wasn't isolated. It was connected to other people's expectations, needs, stability. Leaving a role doesn't only affect the person who leaves. It forces everyone else to adjust. I asked myself questions that had no clean answers. Was it fair to disrupt other people's lives because I felt empty? Was it selfish to want more when nothing was technically wrong? Did I owe my loyalty to the life I had built, or to the self I had neglected? Every possible choice felt like a betrayal. Staying meant betraying myself. Leaving meant betraying others. That's the moral dilemma no one prepares you for. There is no option that feels purely right. There is only the choice of which truth you are willing to live with. I tried to find compromises. I told myself I could keep this life and change internally. Adjust my mindset. Be more grateful. Want less. I consumed advice about acceptance, contentment, humility. None of it touched the core. Because the issue wasn't attitude. It was alignment. I was living a life that no longer matched the person I was becoming, or perhaps, the person I had always been but never allowed to exist. That realization came with grief. I grieved the years I had spent being agreeable instead of honest. I grieved the energy I had invested in maintaining an image rather than exploring a self. I grieved the courage I had postponed, assuming it would always be available later. Courage, I learned, expires if unused. There was a quiet panic beneath everything I did. A sense that time was not waiting for me to be ready. That every day I delayed, the cost of change increased, not externally, but internally. The longer you stay disconnected from yourself, the harder it becomes to recognize your own voice. I noticed how unfamiliar my desires felt when I tried to name them. As if they belonged to someone I used to know. I had spent so long reacting to life that initiating felt unnatural. That scared me more than the idea of failure ever had. Because failure implies trying. And I wasn't sure I remembered how. The truth settled in slowly, without drama. If I continued like this, nothing catastrophic would happen. And that was the catastrophe. I would age. I would function. I would fulfill obligations. I would be remembered as reliable, steady, sensible. And somewhere inside that version of me, there would be a quiet, permanent mourning for a life that never demanded to be lived. That was when I realized something had to break. Either my life would change, or I would disappear inside it completely. I didn't know yet which one it would be. But I knew I couldn't keep pretending that letting life happen was the same as living it. The choice didn't arrive as a dramatic moment. There was no line in the sand. No thunder, no revelation. It arrived quietly, disguised as fatigue. I woke up one morning with the unmistakable feeling that I could no longer pretend. Not because pretending was exhausting, but because it had become pointless. The lie I had been living no longer protected me from pain. It only postponed it. That was the day I stopped asking myself what was safest. I asked what was honest. And honesty was brutal. The truth was that I had been waiting for permission to live. Permission from circumstances. From people. From time itself. I had convinced myself that one day, when everything aligned, would finally step forward. But alignment never comes to those who refuse to move. I saw clearly then that my life had not betrayed me. I had betrayed it. By agreeing to it without presence. By accepting it without intention. By letting it unfold without participation. That realization didn't fill me with courage. It filled me with grief. Deep, quiet grief for all the moments I had numbed instead of felt. All the paths I had dismissed because they weren't guaranteed. All the versions of myself I had silenced because they were inconvenient. I understood then that I didn't need a new life. I needed to stop abandoning myself inside the one I had. So I began in the only way I could, without drama. I told the truth in small ways. I admitted uncertainty instead of hiding behind certainty. I said no without explanation. I allowed discomfort to exist without immediately smoothing it over. I stopped performing peace and started listening to unease. At first, it felt wrong. Selfish. Dangerous. But slowly, something unexpected happened. I felt present. Not happy. Not fulfilled. Present. Presence has weight. It anchors you. It makes even ordinary moments feel real again. I noticed details I had ignored for years. My own reactions. My own resistance. My own quiet excitement when something aligned instead of merely functioned. The world didn't change dramatically. I did. Some relationships shifted. Some weakened. Some ended. Others deepened in ways I hadn't anticipated. I learned that not everyone is meant to know the truest version of you, and that's not a failure. It's clarity. I also learned that choosing yourself doesn't guarantee peace. It guarantees responsibility. Once you stop letting life happen to you, you can no longer blame it for where you end up. Every choice becomes personal. Every compromise intentional. Every regret instructive rather than paralyzing. There were moments I wished I could return to numbness. To the ease of autopilot. To the comfort of telling myself that this was just how life was. But I couldn't unsee the truth. I had crossed a line, not outwardly, but inwardly. And once crossed, it can't be uncrossed. The most surprising part wasn't the fear. It was the relief. Not relief from difficulty, but relief from self-betrayal. I stopped measuring my life by how acceptable it looked. I started measuring it by whether I recognized myself inside it. Some days, the answer was still no. But now, no was an invitation instead of a verdict. I learned that meaning doesn't arrive fully formed. It's built slowly, through alignment, through presence, through the courage to admit when something no longer fits. And I learned this too, you don't need to destroy your life to restart it. You only need to stop disappearing inside it. If you're listening to this and something in you feels eerily familiar, if your days feel full but hollow, if your future feels safe but empty, don't wait for collapse to justify change. Collapse is not required for truth. Ask yourself this, honestly, without drama: am I living, or am I letting life happen to me? If the answer hurts, that's not a sign to retreat. It's a sign you're still awake. I didn't reclaim my life all at once. I reclaimed it moment by moment, by choosing presence over permission. And that choice, quiet, imperfect, ongoing, saved me from becoming a ghost in my own story.